Young people and women of all backgrounds need to be in politics. Politics and government is supposed to be a place that represents everyone. So if everyone's background is not being represented properly in government, then government's not doing its role in representing the community.
Welcome to Women Talk Tech, the podcast for business professionals committed to advancing women in the tech sector.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Women Talk Tech. I'm your host, Marie Weiss, and today it's my pleasure to have a very interesting guest on. Her name is Anna-May Oyiboro. You're a student at Carleton University, and you're completing your undergraduate degree in political science. So this is going to be a particularly interesting show as we continue our series on alternative tech and how we look at careers, any career really today that could apply and be in tech. And we're going to talk a little bit about tech and the political process and the political engine as it is. And we're going to talk about how tech applies. Now, before I do that, I want to formally introduce Anna-May. She was the past co-president for the Carleton Political Science Society. She has her own podcast called Political This That, which I think is a very cool name, and it sounds like a fun podcast.
Thank you.
I would imagine it's on all streaming services, Spotify, iTunes, all of those.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. And she's a fellow of the 1834 Fellowship, a fellowship that focuses on getting young Black people into public policy. And you've completed an internship with the federal government. Which department were you doing your internship on, Ray?
Actually, it was more on the political side than the bureaucratic side. So I actually got to work in a member of parliament's office for a summer.
And how was that?
An amazing experience. It definitely was eye-opening to see how politics works, how government works, and honestly, how being a staffer works and how you are there to support your fellow MP, especially from a constituency side of things.
Yes, absolutely. So way back when I was first starting my career, I was a press secretary to a federal cabinet minister. And
busy woman.
I had a big eye-opening experience.
Busy woman, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was a 90-hour-a-week job. But I tell you that my most favorite part of that job, we all had to have a very high security clearance. And I was allowed to just walk into the Senate whenever I felt like it and sit in one of the Senate seats and have a look around. I was also, on tap during question period in the back there with briefing notes. And I have to say it was a great part of my career. I loved it. I only did it for 3 years because after that you burn out pretty fast. And obviously the government changed and we all got fired. So there was that. But there's a whole other world going on the capital of any nation. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. And I think everybody should have a stint working in government so they can understand that. So well done on your internship.
Well done being a press secretary for a cabinet minister. I mean, it's being a political staffer is never easy, but a press secretary for a cabinet minister is kudos to you because that's intense.
Well, thank you. And she was a female cabinet minister.
Ooh.
And that, to your point, that makes a difference because I was traveling with her nonstop. And when I wasn't writing speeches, I was packing her suitcase and getting her on the next flight. So
no off days.
There was always something.
No off days.
There was always something. And I remember sitting with the rest of the staff at like 11 o'clock at night in the office on Parliament Hill that we had. And we had this tiny little office. We were stuffed in a corner. And I remember sitting there at 11 o'clock at night thinking, what the heck did I sign up for? Like, what am I doing here right now? And that was back in the day. This is a great segue to technology. The thing I loved about that job is, and this dates me, you can tell, what vintage I am by me telling you this story, but email was just getting introduced. And we were just starting to use email in the government. And it was really funny because email, everybody talked about email saying, oh my God, it's going to make your life so much easier. It's going to make everything faster. And I mean, I appreciate it did at the beginning. We definitely were able to do a lot more with email. I was also issued my first ever cell phone when I was up on Parliament Hill. And it was kind of hilarious when you think about how big cell phones were back then.
They're like bricks.
And yeah, exactly. But we'd still be sitting in the office waiting for something to get faxed in from somebody. Some department head was making changes on a speech, and we'd sit there waiting for the thing to get faxed back so we could make the changes on our side. It was kind of a crazy time to be coming up in technology from the perspective of what was new and what was changing. But this was very much about internal communications. And we're going to talk in a second about external communications and the importance of getting people more interested in the political process. So we always ask, the first question always on the show is, what were you thinking in high school? Did you think you wanted a career in politics? Were you thinking about technology? What were you thinking about? How did you wind up in political studies at Carleton?
Fun fact, I actually was on the path to like pre-med and medicine. That was my career path all my life. I really wanted to become a doctor, specifically in OBGYN. And then grade 12, first semester, I took like one of the science courses. I took biology, and I was like, I think the road ends here. I can't do this anymore. Politics was always an interest of mine, but I never actually thought I could pursue it as a career. So I always knew that if I wasn't going into medicine, I was going to go into law. And then my second semester of grade 12, so my final semester of high school, I actually did this program called Model Parliament, which is at Queen's Park. It's open to all high school students from ages 14 to 18, I believe. And you get 3 days, and you actually get to be an MP for those 3 days. So you actually get to go to Queen's Park, meet your local MPP, actually join a political party. So like your version of it, like Liberals, Conservatives, NDP. We actually got to pass our own bill. So that was the first time I was like, okay, maybe I could see this as a career, but like not immediately, like probably being a political staffer or working in the political field, and then eventually maybe running for office. So that's where it started for me.
Hi, listeners. We are so excited to invite you all to join us on Thursday, September 14th at the in-person Women in IT USA event in New York, where Diversity Q and Information Age will bring together the Women in IT Summit during the day and the awards gala dinner that same evening. Join us for a day filled with valuable insights, thought-provoking conversations, and an evening of networking, delicious cuisine, and pure enjoyment. It's guaranteed to be a fabulous time. To find out more about the summit and awards ceremony and to book your tickets to attend, please visit womeniniTawards.com.
For those of our listeners who are outside Canada, and we do have a lot of listeners outside Canada, MP is a member of federal parliament. MPP is a member of provincial parliament. Our distinction between federal government and, in our case, provincial government, or in the case of other state legislature, there's lots of different angles on this. I guess our system largely based still on the British parliamentary system being I don't know what you call it, an outpost of England, I guess. We always forget as a nation we're not that old, right? We're still fairly young in the grand scheme of things. But I'm really curious to chat with you a little bit about the 1834 Fellowship. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what happens there.
Yes. So I was very fortunate enough to be part of the first cohort. So there's this organization called Operation Black Vote Canada. It's a nonpartisan organization, and it focuses on getting Black people involved in politics on all levels of politics, whether that be municipal, federal, or provincial across Canada. They talk to and encourage people to run for office. They also help the candidates, whether that be a councillor, a mayor, an MPP, an MLA, an MP, as they're in these roles. So they have this initiative called the 1834 Fellowship, which is actually named after August 1st, 1834, which is the year slavery got abolished in Canada. So it's aimed to get young Black people involved in the public policy space, not particularly politics, but public policy, whether that be law, whether that be global affairs, whether that be public policy specifically. That's what the aim for the fellowship was. I was part of the first cohort. So being part of the first cohort allowed me to be able to apply theoretical ideas of public policy, because I took a public policy course around the same time I have my fellowship, and seeing the practical implications of implementing public policy in Canada and how that works. So it's a very, very enriching experience, especially as a young Black person. Being around other Black people in this space is very encouraging. And to know that you have mentors and people higher up to encourage you and to help you in these spaces.
I'm going to ask a question as an old person asking a young person. Why do you think not very many young people want to get involved in politics these days? Or is that just a misconception I have? Because I see the numbers of, I guess our voter turnout is still the same, but would you agree that young people have kind of backed away from the political process, maybe out of frustration and annoyance of what goes on? Why do you think that's a true statement, that young people aren't as interested in politics and as we were 20 years ago?
I don't think it's the complete accurate statement to make. I think young people are engaged in politics, but not in the typical way. Like, of course, voter turnout is low, but when I go on social media, I see people engaging with topics regarding housing, regarding affordability. Like, a lot of young people are seeing what's going on in the government and seeing these policies being implemented, and they're like, what about us, right? Like, a lot of young people don't know if they're able to even rent in the Greater Toronto area or anywhere in Canada, to be honest. Buying a house seems out of reach. So I would say young people care about politics, but they may not be doing it in the typical way of going out and voting. I would say a lot of young people are very involved in grassroots organizations. And this ideal, I think, has been always around, that young people don't care. But when you look at a lot of social and political movements, young people have been in the forefront. When you look at the feminist movements in the 80s and the 70s, young people were in charge of that. When you look at gun policy in the States, young people are in front of that. Climate change, for instance, young people are in front of that. So a lot of these movements are run by young people. I just think we are engaging with politics and governments in a different way.
Right. And I would love to see more young people run for office. And I think that it's a daunting, scary thing. And I remember being asked to run for office when I was in my early 30s. And it was overwhelming for me. I was just about to have my second child, and I was already struggling with, having to have a career and juggle family and everything else, let alone throw my hat in the ring to run for office, which is an exhausting effort when you think about it. You have to get elected for the nomination for the riding, and then you have to get elected against the other political candidates, and then you have to get to Ottawa or Toronto, depending on where you're running, and then you have to fight for your place in the party. I saw the inside view of all of that and thought, this is not for the faint of heart. This is
very true.
And it is certainly not for women in a lot of situations, because it's even harder as a woman, I think, to have that balancing
to balance
act.
It.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Exactly, the balancing act.
And back in the day when I was involved in politics at that level, most of the women who were running were either single and didn't have kids, or they were much older and had already had their kids and they were grown, because it's too hard to juggle all of that at once. But I wonder now, let's I think that's a great segue to technology. So let's talk about how governments and politicians are leveraging technology in their communications. Can you talk a little bit about that? The benefits of embracing technology. And again, I've watched major campaigns because I tend to be a bit of a junkie watching campaigns over the years. And I remember Barack Obama was probably the first politician who really who really knew how to work social media. I remember reading a case study about his email marketing campaign and being just totally impressed by the way his team leveraged that. Talk a little bit about that. How are people leveraging technology today? And I think for some people, it's been a game changer.
100%. You look at the example that you brought forth with Barack Obama. Barack Obama got elected in 2008 and then 2012. So that was over 10 years ago. And look at us now. I think one big way is social media. Social media has grown from what we've seen in the early 2010s with just Twitter and email to like TikTok, Instagram, and all of that form. It's allowed, regarding communications especially, is good for young people because young people are always on social media. So to see the politicians that you follow, the politicians that are there to help you and help you on the government level, be there and see what they're doing, kind of be like, okay, so they're at this organization or they're talking about this. It really is a game changer for constituents to be able to also connect with their local MP or MPP, whoever that might be. So communications is a very, very big aspect because if you're not seeing your if you're not seeing your local MP or MPP engage with you don't know what they're doing, you don't know if they care. It's also a direct way, like you can comment on politicians' platforms, you can DM them, you can email them. Like you talked about earlier about emails. Emails also a big, big way of constituents being able to access their local MP or MPP regarding issues that are important to them. So it's a very important aspect.
Now you've I don't think you coined the term, although I could be wrong. You've talked about hybrid parliament. Tell us what hybrid parliament is.
Yes. So in the pandemic, as we all know, everything became virtual. So a lot of people were working from home, and that includes politicians. So hybrid parliament started as virtual parliament, and it's just continuing with committees, continuing with question period, like Marie talked about earlier, but just from a virtual sense. Now that the pandemic has slowly eased and people are now back into the office and stuff like that, politicians are now back to the office, i.e. they're back in Ottawa, but hybrid parliament still remains. So there's a way for MPs to actually not have to go to Ottawa all the time. They can actually, engage in question period, engage in committee, vote on bills from their actual local ridings and always going back to Ottawa. Of course, they still go to Ottawa. They're not completely virtual as they were in the pandemic, but it gives that flexibility for politicians to be able to engage, to do their work as politicians in Ottawa while also staying on their home base.
What do you think some of the downfalls to that are?
That's a good question. Because I've always thought of the good things about hybrid parliament. So I'm trying to think of the downfalls of hybrid parliament. I think maybe the engagement with Ottawa. I think a lot of the people who want to be in the political space go to Ottawa for that for that specific reason, to engage with politicians and so forth. So if politicians are not in Ottawa, it is a little harder to engage with them if they're virtual compared to them being in person. So I would say that is a downfall.
I think, though,
so my personal opinion,
it allows greater access for more types of people who may have found that lifestyle of back and forth to Ottawa hard. I think it opens up opportunities for other types of people to consider running for office. I 100%. Sort of see it as a very positive thing.
100%.
I think, the other question I have that I think is really interesting, and I don't know what your opinion on that is, but, how do you think government's role should be, or what do you think government's role should be in the regulating of technology? And we're seeing some interesting things happen in AI. And I've spoken on panels for years, particularly in the women in tech sector, saying that AI is interesting when used wisely, and that, we need more people. I mean, the whole reason we run this podcast is to get more diverse group of people at the table when important technology decisions are getting made. And I think sometimes technology gets developed in a vacuum and technology decisions get made in a vacuum. Do you think the government should play a bigger role in regulating technology?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think when things like AI have become so prevalent in our society, I think regulations are definitely needed. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to talk to a lawyer and professor who works from the University of Calgary, and his focus is AI technology. And he brought up this amazing point regarding actually immigration, how technology, government, and immigration all come to play. And he was telling me and the other person who was there, he was telling us about a situation where there is immigrants coming into Canada and they had their immigration papers all filed, they had everything. And I think with the AI technology of looking at your face and facial recognition and all of that, the facial recognition actually took the wrong people and they matched the wrong person. So the person who was actually emigrating to Canada was actually seen as somebody else, and their papers and their actual immigration status got revoked. And he brought up this case, and there were 6 cases he brought up that has gone on. And in these 6 cases, 5 out of these 6 cases were of Black women. So that also comes into play of AI and facial recognition of actually looking at darker skinned people, especially darker skinned women, and being able to recognize them correctly. Also, when you look at regulation, you look at what's going on with, I believe it's Bill C-18. I think it's either C-11 or C-18. I could be confused of what's going on when people are going on Facebook and Instagram and not being able to see news articles, and people are like, what is this? Is this censorship? But actually doing more research, I found out to be it's not really censorship. It's basically the Canadian government saying that Meta and Google and all these other big corporations need to start paying these journalists for their time and work. There is more information about that, but from what I could get up, that's the main thing. So even looking at how news is being brought forth, a lot of people are seeing one side of it, seeing it's censorship, but when you actually when the research is being done, you can actually see it's not exactly censorship. So in terms of the government does have a role in regulating technology, AI technology, because if it's not regulated, it's a snowball effect that could have catastrophic issues, and we don't want that.
And I think there's already situations where the government should have stepped in and started to do more regulation around certain topics and certain issues, rather than just chasing email spammers. They should chase people who are nefarious and, causing harm to others because of scamming and phishing attempts and all these other things. And I think that is where the government needs to take a bigger role. What advice would you give to young people, particularly young women, about entering the political space? Do you have any advice for people?
100%. I believe that, like you talked earlier, young people and women of all backgrounds need to be in politics. Politics and government is supposed to be a place that represents everyone. So if everyone's not being represented properly in government, then government's not doing its role in representing the community. I would say encourage young people, and also understand that there's also different ways to become involved in politics. The main areas, of course, voting in local elections, which is really important, but also connecting with your local MP or MPP or your local politician, watching the news and seeing what's going on. There's so many ways, especially with technology rising and social media, that you're able to connect with other people. Join grassroots organizations that are aimed at situations or causes that are dear to your heart, whether that be climate change, affordability, that kind of thing. There are so many resources out there that, thanks to Google, all you have to do is search them up and you'll see them. So that's my biggest advice for young people. It is very easy to get discouraged, but I would say don't get discouraged, because if you're discouraged, then we don't get more young people in politics. We don't get more women in politics, and that's not what we want. We want them there. And just keep up to date with politics. Politics is supposed to be for everyone, and everyone deserves a seat at the table.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. I've been speaking with Anna-May Oiboro, and Anna-May is a student at Carleton University in the political science course. This has, of course, been part of our alternative tech series and how technology impacts our political system. Thanks so much for being on the show, Anna-May.
Thank you so much, Marie, for having me. I hope I brought some insight to your listeners, and I hope they enjoyed listening to me.
Absolutely. You've been listening to another episode of Women Talk Tech. I'm your host, Marie Weiss. And as always, thank you so much for listening.